Why do you think so many people are having a hard time getting sober right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I think about a lot. I think for me, there's two things. One, probably the most obvious, is that the drugs are stronger
Yeah.
and more accessible. So, when I was getting high, I was buying weed in a dime bag that had stems and seeds in it and was probably 1% of the potency that the weed that's being smoked today. So I think for our younger generation, they're getting their hands on really strong drugs at a young age, and it takes over their brain and it's hard for them to kick it. The second piece, and the more important piece, is we are dealing with a behavioral healthcare crisis called loneliness. People are alone, their faces are in their phones, and it's nearly impossible for people that are struggling to put their hands up and ask for help. And so it's a great question, and it's one that I think as a country we need to take a look at.
How would you describe something like loneliness? Because it does get talked about a lot. And a lot of people think of being lonely as just not being in a relationship. Like, what do you think loneliness actually looks like from a guy's perspective?
I mean, for me, loneliness is a feeling, right? It's a feeling. When I feel alone, that's a scary place to be. I mean, and I've been there. I've been there in sobriety. I've been there in my youth. I've been there playing on sports teams. I've been there in environments where I walk into a room of 500 people and I feel alone. If I don't know someone, or I feel uncomfortable, or my mental health is in a bad spot. I mean, loneliness looks a lot of different ways. The loneliness I'm talking about as it relates to behavioral health care is the one where, you're stuck in a room, or you're stuck in your thoughts and stuck in your head, and you truly feel like there is no way out. And I think both of us have probably been there.
Totally. And I think one of the hardest things about kicking addiction from that perspective is you get to the end of this road and you've been using these substances to numb all your pain, numb all your thoughts, numb all your feelings. And at the same time, you've crushed your self-esteem, you've crushed your relationships, you've essentially destroyed your life. Now you take away that solution for those problems, and now you're faced with all the pain, and your self-confidence is so low that your ability to deal with those problems just seems so insurmountable. And then I think as guys, we're also afraid to ask for help. What do you tell people that you speak to, parents or kids that are afraid to ask for help? How can somebody do that in a way that feels comfortable for them?
Yeah, I mean, to your first kind of point or message there, it's hilarious because I think people have it all wrong. Drugs and alcohol, I mean, that worked for me. Yeah. Drugs and alcohol worked for me for a very, very, very long time. It helped me get jobs. It helped me make friends. It helped me, tie in with the cool kids per se, or whatever else it was. I mean, that was my identity for a very, very, very long time until it stopped working, And so if I look at my using career, which is hilarious to call it that, from 15, to 25, there was 10 years there where drugs and alcohol were incredible. And I try not to think about the good times, right? Because that might get my mind going in weird places. But that last 18 months to 2 years, man, I would not wish that on my worst enemy. I mean, being a slave to the opiates, being a slave to the bottle, being a slave to my next high was the worst feeling ever. And so, I think my views on this have changed. When I first got sober 10 years ago or 12 years ago, whatever it is now, my approach was very much like a coach would take with me on a playing field, right? Here's what you have to do it my way. This is how I did it, and you'll get sober. And now I feel like I just have a lot more empathy and compassion for the process and for the journey, and so for parents and people that are going through it, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is a long road. There are going to be hiccups. I think our industry or behavioral healthcare as a whole has done us a disservice, and with words like relapse. I mean, that word sucks, man, because it keeps people high, it keeps people drunk. And the shame and guilt associated with someone who maintains some level of sobriety or abstinence and then picks up again is real. And so I just encourage people to, it's kind of like my tagline, keep going, but it's true. You just got to hang in there.
Yeah. I mean, I think What you said totally makes sense, because I was interviewing a addiction psychiatrist from Harvard a few months ago, and he was talking about.
Was it John Kelly?
No, it was this guy, Dr. K. He's like a big like YouTube doctor. He works with a lot of like young adults and stuff.
Yeah.
But he was talking about like you have to give these people a better offer, because something like we were talking, I think like something like weed or alcohol. I forget exactly what we were talking about, but he was like, some of these substances, they make it easier to go on dates. They make you more sociable. They improve your sleep in the short term. They reduce your anxiety they can reduce your anxiety or whatever in the short term. They do all these things positive in the short term. Like, you have to find something that's better than that for these kids or for people. Otherwise, it's like you give it up, and then it's like, well, my life's now going to be miserable. And I just think that so many people, they just think that when they get sober or when they get into recovery, that their life is going to be miserable. Like, what have been some things that you've implemented in your life that have allowed you to still have fun while not making dumb decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I don't know where you are on spirituality and the universe and energy and all that stuff, but I truly believe that I was put on this planet to try to utilize my experience getting high and now being sober to inspire others to do the same. Because what I know is that when I first entered into treatment, if you would have told me that the rest of my life, the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years, I was going to be hanging out in church basements, smoking cigarettes, with people that were twice my age, I would have said, fuck you, I'm out of here. Right. And so I think in the year 2024, we have a responsibility, guys like me and you and the folks we run around with, to really make this thing look attractive, right? Like they talk about in AA, attractive, a program of attraction, not promotion, right? And I believe that. I have all this experience, and the number one thing the world tells me, or people tell me about me, is that it wasn't something I said, it was something they saw me do, right? And so like I have this crazy experience, right? Like I go on TV, I own a company, I start a nonprofit, I run these marathons. None of that has to do with hanging out in a church basement. So I think people are able to see that and say, holy, like if he can do it, so can I.
What role do you think fitness plays in recovery?
Oh, come on, man. It's the best.
Yeah.
You know that, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, and like, I don't buy into the whole, like, it's another drug and yeah, sure. Fine. Call me a running addict. All good. Like I'll take it, like from where I came from all day. But no, we were talking about today. I mean, I'm down here in Baltimore for a couple events, and we had an early call time, like 5:30 to get on the road. And we were just walking out of our last meeting to come over here and meet you. And I turned to one of Grace, who works with us and helps me out. And I said, I would kill for a 3-mile run right now. Like literally that was my thought, because I was tired, I was dragging. And so for me, fitness and the direct impact it has on my brain and the dopamine outside of like my community and my fellowship that I've found in recovery, fitness is the number one thing that keeps me going. And I believe, and I'm sure you will support this, but I'm interested to actually hear your thoughts on it, that in behavioral health care, it needs to be moved way up the ladder. Oh, yeah. In terms of how we utilize it, because someone told me when I got sober, well, you're never going to get arrested for, eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs. Well, yeah, maybe not. But like, I also don't want to live a lifestyle that is based around eating ice cream and smoking cigarettes, because that's what some people presented to me.
Yeah. And I think like, mental health and physical health go hand in hand. I think you agree with that as well. And I think like when you're in a low place, especially like early sobriety, you have to find a way to deal with a lot of the pain. And fitness like helps with stress, helps with energy levels, helps rebuild your self-confidence. And the big thing I think fitness does that gets overlooked is it gets you like forward focus and forward thinking, because so many times in recovery, you're looking in the past and you're looking at all the mistakes you made, all the shit you did that you regret, the people you hurt, all the times maybe you like couldn't get sober, whatever. And like fitness keeps you moving forward. It's like, oh, I'm going to run for 10 minutes. I'm going to run for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And a lot of people in recovery are looking for new friends because maybe they go to 12-step meetings. Some of the aspects there are great, but they don't want to be hanging around people that are smoking cigarettes and eating sweets all day, right? They want to find different people that are health focused. So going to a gym, joining a running group or whatever can be a great avenue for people to like find a new community of people that are actually like into health and wellness that can support their goals as well.
Yeah, I mean, the synergy between recovery and fitness is real. I always laugh because You know, when I'm working with some folks that are early in sobriety, they're like, you want me to stay sober for my whole life? You know, and that's where like just for today comes in, right? Like just try and don't do drink today. Don't have sex today. Don't do that behavior today that is, you know, causing all this harm in your life. And it's very like you have to start somewhere, right? And with running, for me, if someone would have told me like, hey man, in 2 years you have to run a marathon, I would have said, dude, I am out. Like, I'm not running a marathon. I hate running. But where it started for me was like someone in my treatment center 12 years ago said, hey man, there's this hill out front. I get up every morning and I walk. I walk it. It's been really therapeutic for me. And that's how it started. You know, I started walking up this hill at my treatment center. Next thing you know, a week or two later, I'm like run walking. And by the time I left, I'm like, I'm running up the hill, I'm doing laps, and I'm starting to get the blood flowing. And for me, I haven't looked back. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, man, like, I don't know if I can start working out, or I have a lot of fear walking into a gym. It's a really loving, welcoming community. And it really just takes a willingness to put yourself in a spot where you might believe that you can change and actually get in shape.
Because you lost what, like 70 pounds, 80 pounds too?
Yeah, dude, I was my fucking intake picture at treat. I got to dig that thing up because it's incredible. So I'm 27 years old. I tell this story. I'm 27 years old. I check into rehab. So my dad finds me at the end of my run down in Camden, New Jersey. I had been down there doing drugs, and you know, like the mess that we make of our lives is hilarious. So I'm literally 250 or 260 pounds, yet I'm smoking crack and doing dope all day, which don't usually walk hand in hand. But the thing I was doing is I was getting home at night. Oh, this is so good. And I was taking, so Seroquel is like it's a drug that you take to help you sleep and mood save and whatever, tranquilizer, whatever you want to call it. I was taking one of the side effects of Seroquel is it makes you really hungry. So I would smoke crack and shoot dope all day, and I would go home and I would order Papa John's, and my delivery driver like knew me because he was there every night at 10 o'clock, and I would answer the door and hammer my Papa John's and fall asleep with that in my stomach. And I was probably the only drug addict to like really truly gain weight during my usage. And so, yeah, when I got into treatment, there's that moment when, you know, you're in detox. I mean, this is so funny. I'm even remembering this shit right now. That's why I love doing these conversations. I remember, you know, you're in detox, and like one of the first things to come to you when you go to rehab is you start like looking at some of the girls, and you're like, all right, like, is there any cute girls here?
Right.
And I had my like bunkmate in detox, and all the girls were like giving him all this attention. I'm like, what's up? Like, I used to do okay, like with the girls or whatever like that. And then I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh, this is what they're looking at, you know? And like, I was a mess. And so like that moment, I think gave me a little bit of willingness, you know, not to mention I was going to be there for 3 or 4 months. So I said, I might as well, you know, try and get healthy.
What was more challenging, like losing the weight or getting sober?
Oh, dude, I mean, getting sober is, I mean, I know a little bit about your story. Opiates, right? Or not?
Yeah. I just didn't go the route that I didn't get that far. I went to jail.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always say to people specifically, and like alcohol definitely owns this place in the world. And I believe that it is poison, and it's actually the worst drug there is because it's socially accepted and people stay drunk for a long time because of that. But the opiate withdrawal, I would not wish upon my worst enemy. I mean, you know, I don't know how openly people share about this, but like, one, the psychological torture, you know, because you're on such a low when you don't have your drugs that the only thoughts you have are like killing yourself truly, or doing some really messed up stuff to go steal something so you can get the money to go get high again. And, you know, the physical is, you know, you're constipated, you're sweating, you're hot flashes, you're cold. It was the worst. It was by far the hardest thing I ever did. And looking back on it, I mean, I think that's part of the motivation, because once you're past that, it's like, I do not ever want to feel like that again.
Oh, dude. I went through the opiate withdrawal in jail, cold turkey.
Oh, dude.
And it's like 2 or 3 weeks. And it's like having the worst case of the flu, like physically, is like how I describe it. And you're shaking and you feel like you're trying to crawl out of your own skin, which is the most like awkward feeling for me.
Yeah. I remember asking my doctor in treatment, I was like, dude, don't you just have a pill you can give me where like I wake up in a month? Like, I just like, dude, I don't want to do this. And it's, you know, it's only getting worse with the drugs we're seeing out there now on the open air market. I mean, you talk about fentanyl and xylazine and the stuff that they're mixing the drugs with on the street. I mean, these detoxes are only getting worse. So, you know, getting in shape was hard, but far and away the hardest thing I ever did was get sober.
Well, and I know you were an athlete growing up, baseball, I think, right?
Yeah.
And just like
right down the road, bro. York College of Pennsylvania. We're not far.
Not
yeah,
for like 40 minutes.
yeah.
And like, you know, had a good social life, partied a lot. Like, and then you mentioned the last 18 months of your using days you wouldn't wish on anybody. Like what ended up happening?
You can only lie to yourself for so long, right? Like I'll keep it on me. I can only lie to myself for so long.
Right.
So I think what happened is people in my life started to figure out that there was something a little bit more going on with me than, you know, I overdrank or maybe I did some cocaine here and there. And that was true. And once the people closest to you know, it's kind of like the party's over. And so I was married at the time. I got married in 2009. And shortly thereafter, she kind of caught on to the fact that I was, you know, abusing drugs. And once that happened, it's the worst feeling because you talk about loneliness, you talk about people not understanding it, you talk about wanting truly like waking up in the morning and saying, I just don't want to do drugs today. I just don't want to get high. But then an hour later, you trick yourself into, I need this to go to work. I need this to be a partner. I need this to be a brother. I need this to do all the things that I'm supposed to do. And so it got really small. I started to burn bridges in my relationships. My friends, you know, didn't want to chill anymore. No one wanted to be around me. And so like that loneliness factor came into play. And once I felt that way, it was like, screw it, man. I'm just going to take this thing as far as I can until I either, you know, end up in jail or, you know, something tragic happens.
It's wild, man. It's crazy.
And that's the thing. I mean, like, there's a lot of different approaches to this thing. And I think when I look back, like my parents were great. My dad, man, he hung in there with me. And like, I think he knew. My mom knew, my wife, like the people around me knew, but there was still like yelling and screaming and finger pointing. And so when I think about what someone like me needs when they're at the end of the road, it really, truly is. And it sounds cheesy sometimes, but like it's love, it's compassion, it's empathy, and it's an undying support, which is a huge ask because I hurt so many people. So for me to turn around and say like, all I need right now, dude, is a hug. It's really confusing to the people closest to you in your life, but that's truly, I believe, the most powerful antidote for someone who's struggling.
How do you separate like love and compassion from enabling?
Yeah, dude. I mean, I've been on a tear lately on some of these buzzwords, bro. Yeah. Like relapse, enabling, boundaries, like all these words that like were just dropped into the therapeutic community that like we hang on to. And my truth is like, they're just words and they're kind of a bunch of bullshit. You know, like, are there situations and relationships that enable the identified patient or someone like myself to keep getting high? Absolutely. You know, like, but I'm also someone who believes that if someone's getting high and their mom's giving them $50 a day and she doesn't know that's going towards drugs, like that might be keeping him alive. Right. I don't know. Like, what's he going to do if he doesn't get the $50? What's the next action going to be? So it's really confusing and it's really hard. And I always say, forget being the identified patient or like myself, the addict. It's almost harder to be the family member or the person that's in a relationship with the person that's struggling because there's no playbook for that, man. And so does enabling happen? Sure. But like each case is different. And I think for me, it's like, I'll get these phone calls from moms and they'll say, well, the only option right now is to kick them out to the street. And I say, I don't know if that's true. Like I'm not a parent. I can't tell you to kick your son out to the street. I can help you and coach you on some things you might be able to do to protect yourself while he's living under your roof. You know, and then maybe if If those things don't go well, you can look at the idea of asking him to leave and maybe giving him an option or whatever it might be. But, I think we just need to be careful with some of the language that we use, even though, I think it has helped some people be more supportive.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think I look at it because I've had parents come to me, as well throughout the years. Mm-hmm. And now the big fear is, well, I need to get him into treatment. I need to get him help, because if not, like, what if he does something that's laced with fentanyl, right? And that's happened, and so it's like a hard situation because, like you said, shaming the addict, like the addict in the lowest point already knows that they're a piece of shit, or they feel like they're a piece of shit. They feel hopeless. They already know that their life is not good. Reinforcing that from and hearing that from the person that you love the most is not going to go over too well. But it's like, how do you get the person to want to make that change to like save their own life?
Well, it's crazy, bro, because here's the deal. You know it because people reach out to you for help all the time. And I always laugh because people will DM me on Instagram or send me an email or find my phone number and call me or write into Release Recovery, the company that I own and operate, which specializes in behavioral health care. And they'll say, we need help. Our so-and-so is struggling. What should we do? He's not listening to us. And so then we turn around and we make some suggestions to which they want to argue or not do. So I'm like, hold up, you're coming to me for help. You're communicating to me that your loved one is not willing to accept the help that you're offering. So you're coming to a professional. And now I am turning around and saying, hey, forget your loved one. Let's focus on you for a moment and talk about the things that you can do to help motivate your loved one to get help, and they're not willing to do it. I mean, it's crazy.
What are some of the things you typically suggest?
It's a great question. What are some of the things that we typically suggest? I mean, honestly, the best thing that a family member can do is to change themselves.
Right.
Because if your mom or dad or sister or brother or husband or wife of me, and I'm in the throes of my, I know that the most vulnerable people, the people that are going to surrender to my chaos, are the people that are closest to me. So when I need money, or I need to emotionally abuse someone, or I need to say something to someone to get a reaction, I'm going to go to those people closest to me. If the family member or those people do the work, right? Get a therapist, go to family support groups, start to take care of themselves, be less reactive, I'm going to notice that. And I'm going to start to understand, oh, wait, like they actually did some work and the clock is running out on me. Like my bullshit isn't working anymore. And when the families change miraculously or not so miraculously, shortly behind that is the addict or the identified patient changing along with them, because they can't manipulate or manufacture the drama the way that they used to. I mean, like one of the things I say to parents is like, the louder they get, the quieter you get. If they want to scream at you and call you names, very calmly say, I'm sorry you feel that way. And once they start to feel that change, good things start to happen.
I think something that adds another layer of complexity now is like the legalization and normalization of weed.
Yeah.
Because, I've had countless kids over the years that I've worked with that weed has been the problem. And some of the things the parents will say is, well, at least they're not doing heroin, at least they're not snorting coke. But from some of the experts I've talked to, like weed isn't necessarily as potent as something like heroin, but it definitely needs to be in the same conversation because of how much it's changed over the years with THC and just how it's causing psychoactive like side effects or whatever in certain populations. You run, like I said, an organization that brings a lot of kids in for different substance issues, behavioral issues. Like, where does weed fit into all
Weed,
this?
number one right now. It's number one. And it's scary as hell, man, because we started to see it, I would say, showing up. There was a run, I would say 5 to 7 years ago, where 80% of our milieu was probably folks who were addicted to opioids. Since then, I think two things have happened. One, the opioids on the street have gotten stronger. So some of those people aren't making it to our doorstep, sadly. I mean, they are like myself, fentanyl is killing them. But the second thing, so that was 5 to 7 years ago. And then about 3 years ago, maybe a little bit more now, we started to see all these cases show up of, they entered into treatment because of marijuana induced psychosis. Right. And so basically what was happening is these young guys and girls were at 16, 17, 18, 19 years old when their frontal lobes were not fully developed, were smoking a marijuana that me and you didn't smoke. I mean, this was not the swag throwing in a Philly blunt and smoking in the backyard with a couple buddies. I mean, this is the oils, the vapes, the pure THC, and they were taking 1 or 2 hits of this stuff and their brains were literally, I'm trying to keep it in kind of like layman's terms, like frying out. And so we continue to see that trend. We continue to see young folks showing up, and it's confusing because a lot of them are like, look, man, I'm not an addict. I know I'm not an addict. I just had a bad episode surrounding marijuana. And in some cases, I do actually believe that's true. And that's why I'm very, very slow to slap the label on someone. Right. A case comes across my desk, 35-year-old guy, been drinking for 20 years, track marks, been shooting heroin. I'm pretty comfortable saying, like, you probably have the same thing I have, right? Like, we probably share this illness or however you want to classify it. But the 18-year-old kid who's, taking a bong hit or two and fries his brain out, trying to fit in, ends up in rehab and shows up at my doorstep and says, I don't think I'm an addict. Like, I have compassion for him. That said, what I try to communicate is like, man, I don't know about booze. I don't know about but like, you can't safely smoke weed. Look at what it did to you. If you go back to that substance, you run the risk of losing your mind forever. And I've seen it happen, and it's really, really scary and sad. And I don't get into the politics of the legalization, like that's probably stuff for people that are smarter than me. But I will say, like, it's horrific to know, like, especially in New York City, that you and I can walk into any smoke shop at any time and get kratom or get, the synthetic CBD, THC, whatever the hell, and ingest it some way that's going to make us get high.
It's wild, man, because before, like, growing up, like, people said, like, weed was the gateway drug.
Yeah.
I think that's debatable as well, depending on who you talk to. I think it certainly can be. I think it was for me. I think in your story, it played a part in it too.
Of course.
Right? But now it's not even a gateway drug. It's a drug. Like, It's something that, like you said, is destroying people's lives. And I was inspired to dig deeper because I was working with these kids. And again, like, I hadn't smoked at this point. I forget, like, maybe like I think I've been in recovery well over 10 years. Uh-huh. And they're like, yeah, I was in like the mental institution, the psychiatric ward for weed. And I'm like, wait, what? They're like, I'm going to rehab I'm like, rehab for weed? I'm like, it's because it's like that was kind of stigmatized back in the day. It was like you were kind of a wuss if you went to rehab for weed because it wasn't considered a hard drug back in the day. And now, like, because of the potency of it, so many more people were. And so I was like, man, I had no idea that the potency of it had changed so much. I had no idea the construction of it had really, like, tipped in a different direction. Now the problem is, because of the legalization and the normalization of it, just similar to alcohol, parents are doing it. Parents are eating edibles. Parents are doing it, and they see it as fun and kind of harmless. And these kids, just like kids watching their parents, get hammered at a, club sports game, or watching their same parents eating edibles. And the parents are like, I wonder why my kid, like, wants to get high. And it's like, well, he's watching you do it. Of course. You know what I mean?
No, it's confusing. Culturally, it's confusing. And I mean, I can just tell you, in some of the social environments I find myself in, people are microdosing mushrooms. People are, to your point, taking edibles. They're doing things that maybe might not, produce a hangover the next day. And you're like me, man, and everyone else in the world, until it hits your home or it hits someone close to you, you don't believe it. And you're almost cocky about it, like, it's just weed.
Right.
Until it's your sister, ending up in a psych ward because she fried her brain out smoking the stuff that's out there. And so it's super confusing. And I look, I know plenty of people in my life, I'm 40 years old, that will smoke a joint a couple times a week at night as a way of winding down. It's just like someone that can have a couple glasses of wine a week to wind down, right? Like, okay, that's okay. There are other people like myself who don't have the ability to do that because I'm going to take it to the next level. And for the kids, if the parents are mirroring are exhibiting a behavior, they're mirroring a behavior for their young ones that kind of gives them permission to go out like I did and try booze, to try weed, or try mushrooms, or try whatever else is the hottest, latest, whatever high.
Yeah, I was kind of a little oblivious to how much the construction of it had changed, because I'm not like I don't work in the treatment like world. I just, I'm in recovery and fitness training, like trying to help some of these kids. And I just had no idea that the makeup of it had, and the DNA of weed had changed so much. And like, not just the makeup, but how they're ingesting it, was changed from, nobody's really smoking blunts anymore,
Yeah.
right?
This is the example I use with people is like, I'm holding here, this is like my iPhone version 16.0. Like, this is the weed that's being smoked today. This phone was not around when I was getting high. The phone that was around, if there was any phone around when I was getting high, was the Nokia T9, like that shit I was smoking. And so just like anything else, like our world is going to continue to push the envelope. And it's no different with weed. And like, if we know where it is today, and you talk about the way that weed's constructed and how much it has changed, I'm scared for what it's going to look like in 2030 and beyond,
Yeah, and talk about like fentanyl too, and like how that, because back in the day, it's like, if we're being honest, you could experiment with drugs and most people may be fine, may never develop an addiction. They might have a little bit of a party phase, kind of grow out of it, like we kind of all hoped we would at one point, right? That game is over now because of fentanyl. Talk a bit about why that's kind of...
Yeah, dude, look, I overdosed one time. I took one, I don't know where you fall, but so I overdosed one time. It was, so the OC80s, the green.
Yeah.
Oh, they were so good. And you would lick the green.
I used to have like green stuff.
Yeah, you would lick the green, and then you'd like either use like the pipe fitter to kind of shave them down. And eventually I started shooting them. And so eventually there was a new pill that was the OP80, which was basically time release. You couldn't break it down, right? So you couldn't abuse it. And so my smart tried to put one of those things in a syringe and shoot it. And it was like putting a booger into my arm. I'll never forget it. And I woke up like, I don't know what happened, but I assume I overdosed or did something wrong. I woke up like 45 minutes later, and I don't even know if it worked or what happened, but like, I'd hit my face and there was blood, and I was very scared. But I did a lot of dope, man. And I never overdosed once. Had I been shooting dope today, yeah, fentanyl, I'd be dead. And that's why Narcan, which is the overdose reversal drug, is so important. And for people that don't really understand fentanyl, it's a lot about what we just talked about with weed, right? Fentanyl is 50 times, it's a synthetic opiate that's 50 times stronger than, your typical opioid. So it's powerful and it's lethal, and it takes one shot, and that's why anyone who's doing drugs, that's another kick that I'm on right now, like test your drugs. There's testing kits. You can test the drugs that you're doing to make sure there's no fentanyl present, and carry Narcan, and don't do drugs alone. Because if you fall out, like you don't want to find yourself alone, because you won't make it back. Yeah,
it's so true, man. And speaking of loneliness again, I was reading something about like addiction and overdose statistics between men and women. I was looking at the CDC site today, and it was showing how much higher men are than women versus overdoses. And I also think that, and I've said this before, like men, I think like 80% of the suicides I think are men.
4 times more likely, man. Yeah.
So why do you think men specifically have such a harder time with this stuff?
We're not as tough as we look, bro. Men are not as tough as we look. I consider myself to be, I've been in my fair share of fist fights. I consider myself to be pretty tough,
Especially those Phillies games.
Yeah. I'm a more tame Philly sports fan now, but no, I think, yeah, men are not as tough as we look or as we want to seem. And we're terrified to ask for help. We're terrified to ask for help because we were brought up, most of us, in a world and in an environment and in a culture where it was shut your mouth, figure it out, give me 10 push-ups, don't cry, rub dirt on it. And so, here you are, how many years later, having scary thoughts, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, even if it's just someone breaking up with you. These are all things that happen to men, and we don't know how to talk about it. And so one of the things that we're working hard to do is to create environments that make it okay for men to be vulnerable, talk about their feelings. And look, it doesn't feel great to a lot of these guys because they've never done it before, and it's really scary. So they do it once and they dip their toes in the water, and they probably have this immediate kind of feeling of relief. But you got to get them back a second and third and fourth time. And you know this, man. I mean, even today, I'm sure like you when you need help, like it's not the easiest thing to do. Put your hand up.
No, and especially like the more, I guess, successful you become, the harder it can be because you think you have everything figured out, and you're like, do I want these people to know that I'm weak and that I'm a fraud, or that I have imposter syndrome, or whatever it is, because I'm asking for help in a certain area of my life? But what I've also known is that the more I've embraced the idea that I'm not the smartest person in the room, like the better my life has become. And I think that there's a way to be vulnerable, right? Because if you're not vulnerable, men will take out their emotions no matter what. And it'll be in unhealthy expressions of anger, sadness, stuff like that. So I think it's going to come out one way or the other. But I think like it's awesome that you're, helping these men with tools to, help them process it in a way that's effective. Because otherwise they're going to have struggles with the relationships with themselves and others for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I love that. Not the smartest guy in the room. It's so true. And that's probably a lesson I had to learn just with experience, listening more, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, not just, I'm talking about like life in general.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't serve anyone to believe that their opinion is the only one that matters, right? Or that they're right all the time. So I love that notion.
I know you signed off social media for a while to like kind of deal with some stuff. Was that like
Did I?
I think so. I think I heard you talk about how you like exited social media and you need some time to like.
I haven't done any like, people will like go on and make this big dramatic announcement about like, I'm going on a blackout, and like, okay. Like, I definitely monitor, my social media, and my relationship with social media is always changing. I, for a long time, believed that I needed to personally handle every message and everything that came my way because it was this contract that I had with the world where, someone was there for me, so I have to be there for the next person who needs it. And I found myself, running myself into a ground trying to help others and forgetting about myself. And so, what I've done is and Grace, who I mentioned earlier, is one of those people that like I trust to be in my social media. I trust to respond to messages. I trust to, carry this thing the way that I would carry it. And that's been a huge relief. And again, it's just like you said, like I am not God. I am not the most important person in the room. And so like, I don't need to kill myself responding to every single message that comes in. What my promise or my pledge is that if you do reach out to my account and you do send a message, that we will, and I say we, get back to you and point you in a direction of care.
I guess what I was getting at too, has there been a point like in the last few years or a time where you've kind of felt like lonely or you felt like an emotional rock bottom?
Yeah, dude, last night. I feel lonely all the time, Like I woke up this morning at 5:15 and I looked around my bedroom, and I'm in New York City, and I feel alone. And I don't want to do today. I don't want to drive 3 hours to Baltimore to have business meetings and then meet you and then go to this event. I don't want to do any of that when I first wake up, right? Like it's a lonely feeling. But like that passes, right? Like I know that. And there's days when I wake up excited, like a kid on Christmas morning, of course, like super pumped to go out and do the things that I want to do in life. Real loneliness. Yeah, there's definitely been, moments. I started a podcast. I actually interviewed a grief and trauma counselor a couple weeks ago, and we got into, grieving not just like romantic relationships, but friendships, and grieving relationships. And I've had a few of those where people, weren't who I thought they were. And I've had to grieve those. And that felt really lonely and confusing because, you assume friends are going to be in your life forever, right? Like you just assume that. So that's been lonely. Obviously, anytime there's like romantic breakups, that's a lonely feeling that I think, again, like guys struggle to really talk about. I think anyone in this world that has social media or has access to seeing what's going on in the world, there's been nights, Friday nights in New York City where, and I share about this a lot, like, right, I have this, like, I did this thing, I went on television, I have this platform. If you look at my social, oh, you're all over the place, you're doing so much. But then there I am on a Friday night scrolling through, like doom scrolling, right? And seeing everyone else in my friend group and network out having fun, and I'm like sitting on my ass, right? And so those are lonely moments. And where I will start feeling sorry for myself is it's the innocent bystander effect. You're driving down the road and you see a car broken down, you're going to assume that someone's already called the cops for that car to get towed. So you're not going to call. I see myself as that car a lot, right? People look at me and they assume that I have a lot going on. They assume that my life is big and beautiful. And in a lot of ways, man, it totally is. But it prevents them from reaching out. My friends, my real friends. And what I have learned is that that's not on them. Like it's a two-way street. If I want to connect with people, like I got to pick up the phone and reach out. And that's really, for me, the best medicine for loneliness is to call other people. Hey, Doug, how's your day going? Because it gets my mind out of myself.
And like a lot of people, they'll go on something like reality TV and that becomes their entire identity for the rest of their lives. And they're constantly trying to figure out how they can like reinvent themselves in that world. You and I talked about this when we met for coffee. How have you been able to kind of not fall into that trap? Because I've known you just through the release recovery. I knew you were on the Bachelorette and stuff, but I didn't know you back then. Like, so all I know is what you're doing now. Like, how did you avoid like falling down that path?
Yeah. I mean, look, dude, I've definitely, I'm on the path. I don't know if I've fallen down it or off it or on it. That experience has given me beautiful opportunities. It comes with a lot of pressure. 4 years removed from that experience now, I feel like I have a solid understanding of how to like kind of take what's good and leave the rest. It took me a while to get there. Nothing's as good as it seems. Nothing's as bad as it seems, right? It just kind of is. And what I said to myself prior to going on TV was that, one, I was going to try not to change who I am. And I feel like I've done a pretty damn good job of that. And two, my mission was going to remain the same, which is, I'm going to try to help as many people recover as possible because that gift was given to me. And when my North Star is clear and I'm working towards that, I might get off the path and fall a victim to some of the shit or, look at people doing certain things and say like, why didn't I get that opportunity? But at the end of the day, like I'm happy doing what I do. I've been given some incredible opportunities. Obviously, I have found myself in rooms that, I didn't ever envision myself being in. And so I'm grateful for it all. I mean, that's the net of all of it. I'm grateful for it all. There were some lonely times coming off of TV. There were some lonely times in the past couple of years thinking to myself, did I make the right decision? Did I make the wrong decision? And at the end of the day, like, I made the decision. I have to deal with it.
I think though, looking back, like when you get to the end of your life, you're going to be very grateful because I think what you're doing now is like way more fulfilling. Right. And speaking of that, with what you do now, like, can you provide like maybe an example, and they can remain nameless, of somebody that's come across your path, through release, or somebody in social media you've communicated with that you could see yourself in their story?
This is the craziest. This is fucking wild. All right. So this is the reminder that I need to keep doing what I'm doing. I had a wedding this weekend in North Carolina, and it was for a guy who, so it's fucking best, man. So the wedding is he's on the board of the Release Foundation. So he's a board of my nonprofit. I've known this guy since he was, 3 months sober. His name's Andrew Schwartz. He's the best. He's marrying this girl, Molly. They met because Andrew and I, as a part of the Release Foundation, ran the Boston Marathon a few years ago, and she was there running it. The next time they spent time together was at one of our Monday night runs, which is a community event we host in Central Park. They really started to accelerate their relationship at the London Marathon when Molly's running for release. And so it's this love story, which is enough in itself. But then, dude, I'm going to check into the hotel and I go up to the desk. I'm kind of like minding my own business. I have a question for the young lady at the desk. And she stops me. She goes, Zach, I know you. I said, okay, you want your picture? Let's keep it moving.
Yeah.
She goes, no, I know you. She goes, I want to tell you something. I'm very nervous. And she's quivering, like she's shaking. And dude, I get choked up saying it. She goes, I'm 3.5 years, almost 4 years sober. I said, that's unbelievable. She goes, because I watched you on TV and I watched you talk about your sobriety. And the moment I saw that, I knew that this was possible. And so that story, man, and alone confirms for me that I just need to keep doing what I'm doing. And we had a nice interaction. And the truth is, she didn't want a picture. She didn't give a shit about any of that. She was just a grateful, recovering alcoholic just like me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, dude. It was nuts.
It seems like you relate to a lot of people. I mean, I was at your events packed. Like, there were so many people at Tao.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.
There were so many people up there at Tao and just so many people that were moved by all the stories and your talks and stuff. I think it takes a special person to bring a lot of people like that together, right? And keep it like upbeat. So sometimes you go to these fundraising events and it can be kind of depressing, right? Like, what is it about you that you think people are so drawn to?
It's not me, man. It's the team. It's the people behind release recovery. You know, I always say nothing's bigger than that logo. Nothing's bigger than the spirit of recovery. And so I'm just a conduit, right? Like, I'm just a conduit to hopefully bring people closer to our community, bring people closer to wellness, the desire to change, sobriety, if that's what, you know, you're working towards. But I got to say, man, like the team, you know, on the for-profit side with Release Recovery, we probably have 75 employees. Our nonprofit team, the Release Foundation, which provides scholarship funding to people, not to our for-profit, want to make that very clear, but to people who otherwise couldn't afford treatment. We write checks for them to go get help, is small and mighty. And then it's, you know, behind that, it's everyone that's run a marathon for us. It's everyone that's bought a t-shirt. It's everyone like you that showed up to one of our events, you know, and I believe that. I truly believe that. I'm just one guy. You know, I could turn my phone around and do the selfie videos, but like that doesn't really, like, it's about community and it's about showing up for one another. Like, you show up for me and I try to show up for you. And even just doing this podcast here today, man, like if we help one person today, like we did our good deed. And so like, I appreciate the question. And on maybe a not sober day, I'll tell you all the reasons why it is me. But today I kind of know it's not.
Well, and part of the event too is you were sharing these amazing stories of recovery and people that have had their lives changed through sobriety, through release. We've talked about the importance of fitness and being like a cornerstone in a recovery program if you want to like kind of make it through. Like, what are some other things? Like, if somebody like wants, if they're like ready and they're like, you know what, I just want a few other things that I could implement in my life to make things better, what would they be?
Yeah, dude. I mean, look, I would point him to a guy like you, you know, point him to other people that have lived this life. I mean, your story, when I think about you, Doug, is so powerful, man. And you're out there in front, leading the way and leading the charge and sharing that and being vulnerable, and other men and women see that and they relate to that, and hopefully that inspires them to change, you know. And then there's things that we can all do, and some of it is like, yeah, go get a therapist, maybe talk to a psychiatrist, see a doctor, get a physical, do some of those things. But there's also very basic things that we can do, which is like go for walks, make sure you're drinking enough water, stay close to the people that you love. If you want to look at your relationship with alcohol, do that. It doesn't mean you need to stop cold turkey tomorrow. Don't be so hard on yourself. You know, and then I will tell you, and I will die on this horse, that community is the number one most important thing to someone changing. You look at someone in fitness that gets in shape, right? Yeah, they start working out, but then what do? They find their CrossFit community. I saw this thing, High Rocks in New York last weekend. Like, people were going ape for that. Like they were going nuts, man. And that was all about community. You look at recovery, right? All of a sudden you see people taking sober trips and going on vacations and working out together. And so it's finding people that you relate to and are going to meet you on that same level. And for me, that's been so gratifying because it's put me in rooms with guys like you.
Yeah, man, it's so true. I mean, I think community is everything. And I think one of the hardest things for people, at least this is one of the most challenging things for me when it comes to community is, like you, I mean, I partied with a lot of the same kids growing up and was riding around smoking blunts. I was like staying on their couches when I was homeless, bonfire parties, like you name it, for like years.
Mm-hmm.
And they became like almost like a pseudo family to me. And then when I was like trying to clean my life up, I was still hanging out with them and justifying doing so because I was like, well, I've known them since I was like 9, or they let me sleep on their couch. They want me to do this. But then they're still making the same decisions I was trying to stay away from. And eventually, like, I never relapsed, but I was definitely in some close situations where just by proximity, I was almost in trouble again. Like, did you ever struggle with that? And what advice do you have for somebody who's like trying to let go of old friends?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate. I think for me, one, I went to treatment for 4.5 months, so there was no friends, right? And so those thoughts of how am I going to hang out with people? How am I going to go to social events? How am I going to drink in public? I had a lot of time to kind of think through those situations. Once I got out of treatment, I was blessed with this opportunity to move to New York City and continue to work on myself. And so I wasn't near that friend group that I grew up with. It wasn't until I probably had about a year of sobriety where I started to reconnect with some of those guys that I grew up with. And I will tell you today at 40, those are my best friends in life. Those are my best friends in life. The fresh chain, the text message thing goes all day, every day, because they know me and I know them and we've been through a lot together. And if one of those guys was to not respect my sobriety or to talk down on me, which none of them did, it might be a different story. And I do know people have had that experience and that sucks. But I've been fortunate in that, like, I don't have that direct experience of wanting to remain friends with people, but like not being able to because they didn't respect the way that I was living.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, because for me, it wasn't like that. Like, a lot of these kids were like being like, dude, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Come on, stop being this, stop being that, right?
Right.
And it just became so like lonely. Like I felt way more alone in situations like that than I ever did like spending time by myself when I was living with my grandparents.
Do they see what you're doing now?
Yeah, and it's funny. I'll run into some of them from time to time. I think some of them are still like kind of doing the thing, and they're like, "Dude, like, how's the talk show?" I'm like, "It's a podcast, but it's good, and it's good to see you." And I still have. I mean, I'm sure you did too. I went to like a lot of funerals growing up, and not just for people that like was acquaintances, people I used to like run around with, and so I still have like trace amounts of survivor's guilt because I'm like, how was I the lucky guy to make it out of this? Right. Because I think if I hadn't gone to jail, I was going down the same path that you were going down.
Yeah.
And I was in a position mentally where I was, speedballing in a different way where I'm snorting a line of Coke, snorting a line of Oxy.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, if I didn't wake up, like, would anybody miss me? Like, those were some of the thoughts that were in my head. So it's just interesting, like, when I run across people like that. But now, whenever I feel sorry for myself or be like, I have like a little bit of guilt, I just remember why I'm doing what I'm doing. But, some of them have cleaned their lives up and we reminisce and talk about the old times, and it's fun to do so. But like a lot of them haven't. I mean, my position has changed where before when I first got into recovery, and because some of these people were so like negative about my recovery, I just cut them out completely. And now that I've learned to have more compassion and I've done a lot of healing on myself, I can still have conversations with some of these guys without the anger towards the way that we interacted,
Yeah, man, it goes back to that thought you shared earlier, just about like not being the smartest guy in the room, not being God, knowing that I'm just not that powerful, like I'm just not that powerful. And so if there's friends or people in my life that I look at today and say, like, I really wish they would change. Sometimes it's really just a matter of praying for them, praying that they get everything that they want, sending them good energy, like all the stuff that sounds, crazy, but I believe does help and does, bring people closer to a place where they can heal.
I know your dad's been special to you in your life.
Yeah.
Talk about the importance of your relationship with your dad.
Yeah, dude, my dad's the best. My mom and dad, I mean, like, look, man, my parents are my best friends, and we partied together, like they were known as kind of the parents that would have us over, and my dad, Dougie Fresh, the Bob Seger concerts. And I mean, me and my friend, we love the dive bar and some classic rock, and like my parents were right there with us. And I think very fondly of those times. I'll be honest with you. Like, I don't look back and say like, oh, I wish, like those are memories that I'll take with me. But when it was time to acknowledge that there was really a problem here, my mom and dad both stepped up in their individual ways. And, I think the way that I make my amends to them on a daily basis is by trying to show up, trying to make the extra effort to go see them, by checking in on them. I'll probably walk out of this interview and go call my mom, just because little questions like that remind me, that I wouldn't be here without them.
If you could have an opportunity to talk to Zac, like going through those 18 months you talked about earlier,
yeah,
what would you tell him?
Dude, keep going. It's going to get better. Keep going, bro. I mean, that's what I tell anyone. Like, as much as it sucks, like the stories of recovery never get old. I mean, like I got a buddy right now who's going through something, and I'm talking to him every night, and it's more about some romantic stuff. And I just encourage him, man, like, you're going to look back on this in a year, 2 years, 5 years, and be so grateful for this experience. And what I would probably say, like, in addition to keep going to that guy, is like, what have I told you that this thing that you're going through right now is going to end up being the most important asset that you have in your life? And that's the truth, man. College degrees and blah, blah, blah. Like, for me, my sobriety, my experience, that's the most valuable thing. It's unique to me, and I share the hell out of it because I never know when it's going to help someone.
Amen to that, man. Well, thanks for coming on, dude. This was an awesome conversation. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of it.
Bro, it's good to see you. I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, sharing your story, pushing the envelope. I'm grateful you stayed on me to get me here. I look outside and I see the sun coming out. And it's just like, man, we have a lot to be grateful for. So thank you.
You got it, man. If people want to check out the foundation, if they want to learn more about Release, where do they go?
Great question. Thank you. So I guess 3 things to plug quick. Release Recovery, at Release Recovery on socials. All of our contact information will be there. The foundation is at Release Recovery Foundation. And then, I just started a podcast, which is called The Zac Clark Show. And we're having, hopefully helpful conversations that are going to inspire some change. So feel free to check any of that stuff out. And more importantly, take care of yourself.
You got it, man. Thanks,
bro.
Yep, you got it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.